Hello there, you're watching the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So it's time to see what's making the headlines with Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. A very good evening to you. Pleased to say that they will both be here with us until just before midnight. So let's take a look then at what's on tomorrow's front pages. And Escape from Mariupol is the headline in the Metro, which carries an account of two journalists escaping from the besieged Ukrainian city after they were placed on what the paper calls a Kremlin hit list for revealing Vladimir Putin's war crimes to the world. The Times also focuses on Mariupol, saying that the Russian leader is threatening civilians to try to break their spirit. The Eye reports from Kherson, where Russian troops opened fire on unarmed people staging a peaceful protest, they say. The Telegraph has a picture of what it believes is Vladimir Putin's £500 million super yacht and says it could be seized by authorities in Italy as part of sanctions against Russia. While The Guardian reveals what it says are billions of dollars of assets around the world linked to Russians with alleged ties to Mr. Putin. The Daily Mail reports that the man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had allegedly staked out other MPs and even cabinet ministers as possible targets. The Financial Times reports that the head of the US Federal Reserve is looking at tightening monetary policy, including putting up interest rates in a bid to curb rising inflation. The Express is worried about finances nearer to home and is urging the Chancellor to raise pensions in Wednesday's spring statement. While The Star has news that football pundit Chris Kamara is quitting live TV work. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out all the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. But now let's take a look at some of them and chat through them with the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar. Good to see you this evening, you two. So let's get stuck into the papers. And there's a bit of a range of different stories actually on the front pages, aren't there, Harry? You've picked out the Telegraph, first of all. It's their second story here, looking ahead to the spring statement on Wednesday. A lot of speculation about how Rishi Sunak might tackle the cost of living crisis. So what's the take the Telegraph has?
So this was meant to be Rishi Sunak's sort of steady as she goes. I'm fixing the finances after the pandemic, and we're getting back to normal. This isn't going to be a budget. We're going to get out of the cycle of having two budgets every year, and instead this is just going to be a little update about what the finances are looking like and some minor tinkering on the edges. That's obviously been blown out of the water by the situation in Ukraine, the surging oil price, the surging cost of energy bills, fuel, food, inflation. And once again, this Chancellor who, remember his first budget he gave in March 2020, where he always had to give another one 10 days later, just as COVID first started ripping through Britain. And again, he's sort of having seen all of his well-laid plans sort of go up in smoke, quite literally, with this spring statement. And they're very keen to say it's not a budget, it's not a budget, it's not a budget. But it's beginning to sound like actually there could be some quite serious fiscal moves, especially on tax policy on Wednesday. And the Telegraph are honing in on not getting rid of necessarily the national insurance hike to pay for increased NHS funding, as lots of Tory MPs, some of them in the cabinet, as the Telegraph point out tomorrow, would like to happen. But actually, how he can mitigate the effects of that tax rise, 1.25% on workers and another 1.25% on their employers. And it looks like there could be some movements with the national insurance threshold, which comes in at about £10,000, just under £10,000 now. If that was moved up to say £11,000 or £12,000, you might start to see some of the hardest pressed and lowest paid workers excluded from this tax rise. And it does feel to me a little bit like the mood music is that's where it's heading.
Would you agree with that, Pippa? Because this has been criticised, this national insurance rise, by various politicians and some business leaders as well, haven't they? Not least because of the timing of it. And yet we did have the Chancellor and Boris Johnson recommitting to it just a matter of weeks ago.
Yes, I mean, there's been this push from Conservatives, not just backbenchers, but also some ministers, including those in cabinet, to delay the national insurance rise. It's obviously going up for the main rate for employers from 12 to 13.5%, so that 1.5 percentage point increase, which could be quite substantial. And Harry says, I think what we're most likely to see is a sort of targeted support. There's been calls across the board for things like a cut in fuel duty, for the, like I say, for the delay in the national insurance rise, and various other measures which the government believes are not targeted enough. If you look at the support which they've given so far to help with the cost of living crisis, and of course this predates the Ukraine war and the knock-on impact that's had on energy prices, global gas and oil prices. But initially, with the cost of living crisis on the horizon, the government announced a package of support which was targeted through both refunds through energy suppliers to households of about £200, and also support through council tax. And the idea of doing it that way rather than sort of, more sort of headline measures which would affect everybody, is that the support is targeted at those that are worst affected, because it is the poor who are overwhelmingly affected by all of this. Some families will pay perhaps a quarter of their monthly income on energy bills, and with those set to go up, in some cases to double, that's obviously a massive blow and much less sustainable for them than it is for wealthier families. So I think any support we'll see, whether it is raising the threshold, as Harry says, or any other measures, possibly an extension of some of the schemes which are already in place, are likely to be targeted at the least well off, because they're going to be the worst hit by all of this.
OK, and a quick word on the Sun's coverage, your paper's coverage, Harry. We've got page 2 here. That the main headline on that page is "Fuel prices are hurting." I get it, because there's obviously a call to tackle a fuel duty. But I know that you've also focused on the issue of debt, haven't you? And the soaring debt levels.
The problem that Rishi Sunak has is that he'll be probably handed in the next, well, right about now, actually, I suspect, in the next 24 hours, the forecast for the coming year, and also tomorrow we're going to get public sector borrowing figures. And if you top that up, just the level of interest payments the government are paying this year on that massive COVID debt, that debt that's now being driven up by the price volatility and various other issues on the global markets, means that actually for 21-22, the government is going to end up paying, taxpayers are going to end up paying more than £50 billion just on the interest on the debt. And that's more than £45 billion that we spend on schools. So I think there'll be a bit of a desperate plea from the Chancellor just to keep all of this in perspective and go, yes, look, I want to help, but at the same time, we do have to keep that debt down and get the deficit down, because we are wasting essentially billions of pounds that could go on public services, literally going on interest payments. OK, we're going to take a quick break there. Lots more to talk about after the break, though, so don't go anywhere, including Russian troops turn on peaceful Ukrainian protesters in the occupied city of Kherson. That's according to The Eye. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight is the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar. Pippa, we're returning to the front page of the Daily Telegraph because there's an article at the bottom that says Partygate accused may deny charges, says Met. And there was news today that the Met Police was going to start interviewing people in connection with these allegations of parties in Downing Street and also widen its investigation.
Yes, and this is the first we've heard from the Met for some weeks on Operation Hillman, which, of course, is their investigation into the allegations of parties held in Downing Street and across Whitehall during lockdown. And what the Met announced today in the statement was that they would be holding face-to-face interviews, having up until this point focused on getting questionnaires from some of those individuals involved. And that raises obviously the prospect of the Prime Minister himself, his wife Carrie, and some of their senior aides being interviewed under caution face to face, which would be the first time, of course, that that has happened to a Prime Minister. The Met also revealed that they've already sent out more than 100 of these questionnaires, which is higher than we'd previously thought. And they explained that this is because as they had questionnaires coming in, other individuals were implicated, and then they had to try and approach them and sort of cross-reference the stories, if you like. But they also point out that no fixed penalty notices have been issued thus far. Now, what's not clear from the statement is whether that is because they are still going through that process of cross-referencing all those different bits of information, all those bits of evidence. They also have 300 photos and lots of documents at their disposal to look into, or whether that's because none of those have actually met the threshold thus far. And they made clear that should they meet the threshold, they will impose fines. And Number 10 has told us that they'll let us know if the Prime Minister, or when the Prime Minister is interviewed, or indeed if he's issued with a fine himself. And it's our understanding this evening that he hasn't yet been approached by the Met for a face-to-face interview, but I think we're all anticipating that coming in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, yes, and Harry, how worried do you think the Prime Minister will be about this news of a widening investigation and interviews starting to take place? We saw Jacob Rees-Mogg dismissing concern about so-called Partygate, didn't we? He said it was a fluff and fundamentally trivial. But do you think there will be worries at Number 10?
I think it's an element of wishful thinking there from Jacob Rees-Mogg when when the Met do eventually come back with an answer one way or another. There's going to be a lot of shouting either way, regardless of what the Met say. So I think it's a row delayed rather than a row subdued. I thought the statement by the Met was a bit weird actually today. It was very long and didn't really say very much. And in it, it kept stressing that anyone being interviewed was going to be interviewed as a witness rather than a suspect. And I can't get my head around how anyone who is going to be interviewed for attending an event could be interviewed as a witness rather than being a suspect, unless perhaps they're talking about some of the police people on duty in Downing Street at the time, perhaps security guards, because anyone actually who is under investigation can't really be interviewed as a witness. They have to be interviewed as a suspect. So it struck me as a bit of a statement that was sort of, this has died down for a few weeks. The Met, were rumbling on spending lots of money on this investigation. It felt like they sort of needed to say something and have dressed up a lot more than they actually have to report back into the statement. And it's almost leaves more questions than it answers. And look, on the widening thing. Oh, hello.
Oh, I just said very briefly. In fact, I'm going to have to end it there, but I think we're going to revisit this subject in the 11 o'clock hour. Harry and Pippa, for the moment, thanks very much indeed.